would like to welcome everybody to this public lecture, The Evolution of the Maritime Industry in Barbados, with special reference to Eric Hassell and his shipping business. We would like to extend our greetings and thanks to our specially invited guest, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, Minister of Maritime Industry and the Blue Economy, Sir Richard Cheltenham, President of the Senate, Dr. Henderson Carter, guest lecturer and historian, Sir Henry Fraser, Ms. Annette Weeks, Acting Comptroller of Customs, Sir Trevor Hassell, Chairman of the Board of Eric Hassell Shipping, board members of Eric Hassell Shipping, staff members of Eric Hassell Shipping, Hassell, and all the Hassell family members. Good evening, all. On evenings like these, or moments like these, I'm often reminded of that quotation, until the lion has his or her own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. It gives me great pleasure this afternoon to be a part of this lecture that speaks of a Caribbean man who faced adversity, who left his home at an early age, and eventually started his own business at the tender age of 54, and is still today thriving business in Barbados and the Caribbean. To start this event off, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Mrs. Erica Luke to give a few brief remarks.
Thank you, Damani. Good evening and welcome. I wish to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Minister of the Maritime Industry and the Blue Economy, Mr. Kirk Humphrey, Chairman of Board Members of Eric Hassell and Son Limited, Dr. Henderson Carter, guest lecturer, staff of Eric Hassell Shipping, Blue Water Shipping, EHS Freightliner, specially invited guests, customers, family members, and friends. It is an honor to be here this evening as we celebrate 50 years in business and have withstood the proverbial test of times in a very challenging economic environment. We have much to be proud of. In essence, our celebrations really focus on documenting our history within the wider global maritime industry and the role that Eric Hassell played within. Not wanting to detract from Dr. Carter, I encourage you to relax, enjoy the lecture, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Luke. I would now like to welcome the Honorable Mr. Kirk Humphrey to make a few brief remarks. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. And I always find it interesting that when we attend these nice formal events, people don't speak back. So, good evening. And a very special good evening to Sir Trevor, Sir Richard, and Sir Henry. Also a very special good evening to the chairman, the board of directors and staff of Eric Hassell Group of Companies, to all the partners in the industry, all the specially invited guests, all of the Hassell family, of course, representatives of the media, persons from my ministry, every single one who's here distinguished by virtue of being here, good evening. The group of companies operates within the maritime industry and the blue economy, this group of companies, promoting economic advancement through shipping and trade. This company has its genesis in the post-independence era, 3 years after Barbados became an independent nation, where regional cooperation and the idea of a one Caribbean movement was forged. From inception, the company has played a significant part in the Barbados maritime industry and the regional integration of Caribbean people. I should say here that when I was asked to give these few remarks, I was clashing with another event. And my secretary was about to write and say that, I would be unavailable. And I had to tell her that I would have to be a madman to be minister responsible for maritime affairs and to refuse to come and speak at an event being hosted by the Hassell family. Such is their relationship with the industry. But since its establishment in 1969, the company has come a very long way from a one-door rented space in the Barnes building on the Chamberlain Bridge, expanding to 3 distinct businesses: Eric Hassell Shipping, Blue Water Shipping, and EHS Freightliner, run from corporate headquarters based along the Spring Garden Highway. It is a very true thing to say that Barbados has benefited substantially from the early pioneers of the maritime trade, such as Captain Eric Alfonso Hassell. And tonight, we are privileged to share in the rich legacy of his determination and grit in building a most powerful legacy. At this point, I want to commend the Eric Hassell Group, not only for contributing to this legacy, but for its commitment as a shipping industry to preserving our ocean ecosystem for future generations and to charting the path forward toward the development of Barbados' blue economy. As you know, shipping is indispensable to the world that we live in. It is a sentiment echoed by the international maritime community during World Maritime Day in 2016. This theme still holds true today and will in the future, given that 90% of global trade is made possible by seaborne trade. As an IMO member state, Barbados, under the auspices of the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy, is on path to ensure that Barbados engages in shipping and other maritime-related activities in accordance with the international best practices and standards. They gave me a whole set of stuff to say about the port, but I won't say it here. There will be another conversation at another time. Suffice it to say that the port must serve the people and the businesses that operate within the port so that they too can serve the people. And that we have determined that the Barbados port must become the most efficient port in the region so that Barbados again shines as a beacon of hope for all that aspire to do business. Conscious of all this, we've determined that the port must become a green port, and that everything we do must be about renewable energy, a circular economy, keeping things in the system, making sure that it works for everyone. But ladies and gentlemen, this evening is really and truly about the Hassell family. So let me close by thanking the board of directors and Mrs. Erica Luke, who steers the ship within the Hassell group of companies, for their foresight in documenting in print and in film, and in tonight's lecture, the evolution of maritime industry in Barbados. I also want to thank, of course, you, Dr. Carter, for taking the time not only to do this monumental book, which captures the history of the Hassell family, but also for the presentation here this evening. So thank you very much, and I do hope you all enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I would now like to invite to the stage Mrs. Tessa Charlton Shaw to welcome our guest speaker.
Good evening, and thank you, Damani. Dr. Henderson Carter is head of the Department of History and Philosophy and a senior lecturer in history at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, where he teaches West Indian history, U.S. history, and Barbadian business history. He taught at St. Anthony's School, where he was deputy principal between 1987 and 1995, at Queen's College from 1996 to 2009, and now at the University of the West Indies since 2009 to the present time. He holds a Bachelor of Arts with honors in history and political science from the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, a MPhil in history with a thesis on the history of the rum enterprise in Barbados, and a PhD with a thesis on post-slavery protest in Barbados. His research interests include the rum enterprise in Barbados during slavery, Barbadian credit union stalwarts, post-slavery protest in Barbados, and the 1937 revolt. He is currently involved in a project to produce a dictionary of Barbadian biography. He's author of Business in BIM, A Business History of Barbados, 1900 to 2000, Powering Our Nation's Progress, the story of electricity service in Barbados, 1911 to 2011, Switching On with Alcock for 50 years, a history of Everson, or Alcock and Company Limited, 1961 to 2011, and A Man Called Peace, the story of Eric Hassell and his shipping enterprise. His latest book is Turning Out Gentlemen, Samuel Jackson Adams at Combermere School, 1947 to 1974. Dr. Carter has also written on Barbadian social history, and some of his other publications include Shaping a Nation, Principles of Barbadian Schools, 1900 to 1980, Molding Communities, Shaping Lives, A History of the Church of the Nazarene, 1926 to 2008, and an interesting title, Labor Paints, Resistance and Protest in Barbados, 1838 to 1904. A man of God, a humble man, a gentleman, might I add, and a gentleman. It gives me great pleasure to present to you Dr. Henderson Carter.
The Honorable Kirk Humphrey, Minister of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy, Sir Richard Cheltenham, President of the Senate, Sir Henry Fraser, Sir Trevor Hassell, Managing Director Mrs. Erica Luke, members of the Board of Directors, the Hassell family, colleagues at UWI, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good afternoon to you. Good evening to you. Thank you for coming to celebrate this 50th milestone of a leading shipping agency with a story of tragedy, struggle, and success. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to tell aspects of this story this evening. You know, we have placed a lot of focus as historians on the production of sugar and rum, and of course the growing importance of the tourism industry as a main economic driver. But we have not truly appreciated the role of the maritime industry, which is critical to the support of manufacturing and provides many jobs for our citizens. Indeed, I congratulate the government of Barbados for emphasizing and isolating its role by creating a Ministry of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy. I think it is necessary to isolate that, and through its isolation, we could provide more jobs for our young men and our young women. My thesis this evening is that schooner captains like Eric Hassell played a pivotal role in maintaining economic stability in a period of hardship and distress. And I'm talking about the 1940s, 1930s, way up into the 1960s. Furthermore, the Hassell shipping enterprise is a key success story and should be told to Barbadians as we are inviting our youth to pursue entrepreneurship rather than to go and look for a job. I want to, before I get into the meat of the lecture, outline my objectives this evening. I will focus on the 20th century and go right up to the present and discuss two main areas. First, how and why did this maritime industry evolve? And how valuable was this activity? Secondly, how did the Hassell business emerge? And what factors have contributed to its success over the last 50 years? I want to define the maritime industry rather broadly, to include those involved as shipbuilders, boat builders, repairers, retailers of marine products, service providers, equipment manufacturers, seafarers, fishers, managers and operators of shipping lines, shipping agencies, custom brokers. One of the reasons for the evolution and the growth of the maritime industry in Barbados is the country's location in relation to Africa, North and South America, and the Eastern Caribbean. I think that this is critical to our evolution as a maritime hub. What is even more important is our natural harbor, that wide bay known as Carlisle Bay, that inlet that we can see here on the this inlet that goes right into the careenage, or as we say, the careenage in Barbados, so that boats could be careened on one side and scrubbed and cleaned. That harbor, and of course our position at 13 degrees north, 59 west, those aspects are central to the evolution of this maritime hub. Barbados, as you know, was the first port of call for ships coming from Africa during the period of slavery. Bridgetown was that offloading center for ships coming from Spicetown, laden with sugar, rum, and molasses, and ships coming from Consett Bay in the east with those products, rum, sugar, and molasses. Barbados was also a convenient refueling point for ships traveling to South America from North America, and for ships coming from South America to North America. Very convenient refueling point. As a matter of fact, in 1918, we are told, and there's a lot of evidence to substantiate this, that a ship known as the USS Cyclops, a transport vessel, docked here on March 4th, 1918, after coming from Brazil. It left a few days later on its way to Baltimore, but never arrived in that territory. March 4th, 1918 was the last that we heard from that ship. And if you go to the archives, it's a large file because it has puzzled historians for over 100 years. Where has this ship gone? But the point I want to make is that Barbados was a refueling center for those vessels going to and from North America. And it explains in Bridgetown the emergence of hotels. And there was a time when many of our hotels were in the city. Perhaps we're going to get back to that stage. We've heard about tippling houses in the 18th century, brothels as well. We've heard about the Rachel Pringle's Royal Naval Hotel, all designed to allow sailors to get some rest after a long and arduous voyage. And if you want to add Nelson Street of latter vintage, you can see the point. So we are saying, therefore, that when we look at the emergence of the maritime economy, we have to factor in our location on the map. The second point I want to make has to do with the knowledge transfer of Sabon seafarers in helping to bolster the maritime industry. Sabon, as you know, is a small island, 5.1 square miles, very small, but significant in producing a long line of captains and seafarers. Many Sabon people migrated to Barbados after 1906 to receive for their children an English education. Sabon also had a navigation school. Many of its males were seafarers and took to that role as early as 11 or 12 years old. And that is why Sabon is a place, I'm told, with many widows. Many of them did not come back as well. That's the nature of the game. But the point that I'm making is that the Sabon captains and seafarers brought knowledge and skills to Barbados to help to bolster the industry. So we read about Frank Hassell, the father of Eric Hassell, Captain Eric Hassell. We read about Benjamin Hassell. I'm not sure if he's related, but he was another schooner captain in the 1920s, a very popular schooner captain. And of course, Eric Hassell himself, a schooner captain and later a motorboat captain. The Sabon people brought knowledge of shipbuilding to Barbados as well. For example, the inner Vanterpool, a schooner 105 feet long, was built at Old Town by Captain Lovelock Hassell. So at Old Town, you have ships being built, schooners being built. So I'm saying, therefore, that Sabon is critical to our understanding of the maritime heritage. Thirdly, the operation of inter-island schooners, motorboats, and steamships created much activity in the Carlisle Bay region and on the wharf. Operation of the inter-island schooners, motorboats, and steamships. The schooner trade was important to Barbados in a time of distress in the early 20th century. The question is, what did the schooners bring? What role did they play? Many of them brought wallaby poles to Barbados. And those wallaby poles were used for the erection of telephone lines and power lines. They also bought firewood as well. And these were the days when people used a lot of firewood. Not gas, but firewood and coals. The schooner captains also brought rice. As a matter of fact, when the Zipper went down in 1963, skippered by Captain Hassell, that ship had 1,500 bags of rice on board. 1,500 bags of rice. In addition, and I think we have a photo. Yes, this is the harbor log. And it says, Barbados' rice stock were further strengthened yesterday, and this is in the 1960s, when the auxiliary schooner Francis W. Smith berthed from British Guyana with over 1,800 bags of rice. And of course, you have wallaby poles, 4 packages of fresh fruit, bunches of plantains, and 5 tons of firewood. When those schooners arrived, people got excited because they knew that food was on board. In addition to rice, we have kerosene. Again, most of our young folk would not have used kerosene oil. But nearly every house in the 1960s in Barbados used kerosene. My mother had an old kerosene stove. It gave a lot of trouble, I must admit. But most people had kerosene stoves. And I remember running out with a big bucket to get kerosene from the truck as it came along. And that was a weekly chore as we did. Every week, every Wednesday, we would wait until that truck came to get our kerosene. The schooners took the risk of going to Trinidad during heavy U-boat activity in the Second World War to get kerosene so that we can get something to eat here in Barbados. Not only did they bring kerosene, they brought fruit from the Eastern Caribbean, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent. There was a time in the 1960s and 70s when individuals, hawkers, came up from the islands, peddled their stuff, and those hawkers brought their produce via schooners. And of course, some people who were traveling took the opportunity to travel as well. We are also told that in the 1970s, Eric Hassell arranged for wheat shavings from the flour mill in St. Vincent for Roberts Manufacturing. Those wheat shavings would come to Roberts Manufacturing to make animal feed. And that is important as well because many Barbadians had animals in the yard. There was no yard, really, without animals. Today we have yards with gardens and flowers, etc. But in those days, animal feed was critical to a household. People reared rabbits, ducks, all sorts of things. So we had those imports, those critical imports coming from the Eastern Caribbean, from Trinidad, from Guyana. But what about exports? Indeed, Hassell started his business exporting limestone, ground limestone, coming from Rogers Quarry and Ellesmere Quarry. Now, Ellesmere is in St. George, my hometown. And I always used to wonder what cargo was in those large yellow trucks coming down Gun Hill. And you will see them almost daily. Now I know that was limestone from Ellesmere Quarry going to Bridgetown to be shipped by Eric Hassell to British Guyana. And of course, we had the steamships. We cannot forget them. Steamships come in here, offloading cargo for Dominica and St. Vincent. And that is why the schooners were so important in that transit cargo. The evidence suggests that many Barbadians, especially around that area such as Bayland, the city area, got employment from the maritime industry. In 1959, for example, over 2,000 Barbadians were employed on either steamships or schooners, 1959. And in 1959 as well, their total earnings amounted to 1.7 million British West Indian dollars. And of course, the point that we're making here is that this continues today. Many Barbadians still go on board ship. And as a matter of fact, when we look at the riots of the 1930s, there's an argument that suggests that many of those Barbadians who worked on ships and went as far as South Africa and the Baltic and Russia of political consciousness. And the seamen were the most militant persons during that 1937 uprising or revolt. So that maritime trade was important. And that is why when the war started in 1939, the Second World War, Germany sought to disrupt that trade. And they sought to do it right here in Barbados. We've already spoken of the disappearance of the Cyclops at the end of World War I. And some people, according to the reports, German people were knocking around Bridgetown during that period. But fast forward to 1942. In 1942, the Mona Marie, built in Canada, this is a schooner, was attacked 50 miles southwest of Barbados. This was skippered by Laurie Hassell, 50 miles. Also in 1942, we have the famous attack of the Cornwallis and the Betancuria. Some people remember the Cornwallis, but there were two boats that were attacked in Carlisle Bay. And some Bajans were happy. And the reason why they were happy was that sardines became very plentiful. Normally, in a case like this, when a ship is attacked and a ship is hurt, people like to come in and get the stuff and go away. And that usually causes riot. So Barbadians enjoyed the sardine, but the point that I'm making is that the Germans saw this trade as significant and tried to disrupt it. And I think we have an image of the Cornwallis at Carlisle Bay in 1942. I now want to move on to my fourth point. And this is the construction of a screw lifting dock in 1889, helping to promote the maritime industry in Barbados. You will see, if you go there now, that there's a sign that suggests that this was built in 1887, but an act was passed in 1887, but this construction really started in 1889. This screw dock, or lifting dock, was built by a Scottish engineer by the name of John Blackwood. Came to Barbados, he applied to the legislature for permission, he was granted this permission, and he built this screw dock. It is said to be a Victorian marvel. There was one built before in London in 1857. I'm not sure that it is there now, but the evidence suggests there's another screw dock in Singapore. So we have two remaining in the world. This screw dock in Barbados, 240 feet long, 46 feet wide, can hold or could lift schooners and other large vessels. The dock offered services such as lifting, the removal of barnacles, those small sea-like animals which cemented themselves to the bottom of ships. And of course, the dock offered services in ship repair. Not only schooners, but large military vessels were repaired there. When John Blackwood died in 1904 at sea, the dock was taken over by the Central Foundry. And because the Central Foundry went into liquidation in 1984, that brought an end to the operation of the screw dock. I will say a little bit more in the conclusion. I will return to that. But the point is that having a screw dock was important because you have ships coming into this region, they could stop here for repairs because of a working screw dock, using steam in the first place, and then electricity in the 1920s when electricity came to Bridgetown. The fifth point I want to make has to do with government intervention, especially after the 1950s. 1951 marks the end of the road for the old planter elite group that controlled political power from the 1630s right through to the beginning of the 20th century. After that, we have people like Grantley Adams and Winter Crawford Hugh Gordon Cummings, Menzies Cox. A lot of middle-class politicians came into power, and they saw the role of government not only to maintain the status quo or hold the fort, but to advance the country. And a lot of this government intervention came after Hurricane Jeanette. Hurricane Jeanette ravaged the country. Fortunately for Eric Hassell, he was midway between Barbados and Guyana on his return to Barbados when that hurricane struck. He was on board the Lucille Smith, and he came aboard, checked on his family, and they were okay, but other people were not so okay. The hurricane routed power lines, destroyed homes, and took the lives of 38 persons. Many of them died when a church in Christchurch, a Wesleyan Holiness Church, collapsed and killed about 19 people. The fishing industry was hit hard. 18 sailboats were lost, 36 sailboats damaged. The estimated damage was 47,000 Barbados dollars. And the government came in to assist these fishermen with over $42,000. And I must say that government has continued to assist the fishermen and the fisherfolk. Sometimes when we mention the maritime industry, we forget these people who put fish on our tables and risk their lives out there on the high seas. The point I'm making here is that the government played a leading role and continues to play a leading role in creating and upgrading landing sites and markets in the 20th century, and of course, coming into the 21st century. That government intervention was also critical in the construction of the Deepwater Harbor. For many years, going back to the 1880s, there was a lot of discussion on the Deepwater Harbor. Into the 1930s, lots of discussion, but no movement. Adams, who was premier at the time, Sir Grantley, took that decision in 1957, around that period, to go through with the construction of a Deepwater Harbor. It cost over $30 million, but in my view, played the most significant role in bolstering the maritime sector. The question is, what did we lose when that harbor was constructed? First of all, we lost Pelican Island. Now, there were a lot of people who were very sentimental about the island. The island was a quarantine station up to about 1945. But after that, it was used for recreational swimming. People would tell you that they were, having races out to Pelican Island from Land's End. It was also used for picnics. And there were some people then, the harbor was being considered, who wanted the island to stay. And sometimes we got to be careful with sentimentality. What was lost? 2,000 lightermen were displaced. Now, those lighters played an important role in moving cargo to ships out in the Carlisle Bay and, of course, bringing cargo in. And those lighter men had been working for many years. 2,000 of them were displaced. 600 were employed in the new port, and the government set aside $1.7 million to relieve their plight. So the lighter men were displaced. Those warehouses along the wharf that took goods and stored those goods from ships anchored in Carlisle Bay, those warehouses of DeCosta, Robert Thumb, S.P. Mussum, Plantations Limited, etc., now became obsolete. When you go down through Cavens Lane, going into that area of the Screw Dock, along Cumberland Street, you see the warehouses on both sides. Those warehouses now became obsolete. So you could understand why there was resistance to the construction of a deep water harbor. And some businesses on the pierhead lost sales. The evidence suggests that William Maughan's pharmacy, which used to attract a lot of sailors coming off the bay, began to lose sales. And finally, Maughan packed up and wound up his business. So that when we look at the impact of the construction of the harbor, some people lost sales in that region. But the question is, what was gained? We now had a modern harbor opened in May 1961 to handle cruise visitors. Now, I want you to imagine a cruise visitor coming to Barbados and having to get off in a launch or lighter and to be rowed in to the careenage. I want you to imagine that. And of course, sometimes the sea is rough, and you have to deal with that inconvenience. But now they just get off, the ship comes right up to the berth, and they're sailing up Travers Bay. That modern port could now handle container vessels, and containerization was steadily gaining momentum in the Western world. And in the 1970s, many container ships were coming to Barbados. If we did not have that port, we could not have handled container traffic, because you couldn't put a container on a lighter. The new harbor also had an 80,000-ton bulk storage for sugar. That large building you see there. Perhaps we may need to revisit that building at this stage. Now we are only producing 10 to 12,000 tons. But there was a period in Barbados when 80,000 tons of sugar could be placed in that bond. And of course, since 1961, the harbor has been upgraded, or I should say, the port has been upgraded. So in 1995, we have a duty-free center so that the tourists could come off and buy their items. And we also have in the area a recreational area for pleasure craft that is known as a shallow draft. So we have the expansion of a port. And to top it off, to put the icing on the cake, a modern highway from the airport, linking the airport and the seaport so that you could have transfers. Nobody has to go through Bridgetown or come along the south coast. You can have quick passage to have your cruise and enjoy yourself hassle-free. So the port, therefore, we got to congratulate the government. We got to congratulate the Adams government. We have to, I'm talking about Grantley Adams, we have to congratulate successive governments who upgraded that port between 1978 and about 1995. And the port continues to be upgraded. Now that port development, in my view, has contributed significantly to the social and economic development in Barbados. We had not appreciated it. We see the port and we say, oh, this is inefficient and everything, but when you look at its role in the development of the country, especially in an economy where tourism is our number one plank, economic plank, then you have to understand and appreciate the role of the port. So we've looked, therefore, at the development of the maritime industry. I now want to go to the second section of the lecture. Now, I'll be over soon, don't worry. And look at Eric Hassell, Captain Eric Hassell, and his shipping enterprise. Eric Hassell was born in 1914. He was the son of a schooner captain, Frank Hassell and Gladys Walks. He was educated at St. Leonard's Boys in Baxter's Road. He left school at St. Leonard's at 11 to become an apprentice seaman. Not because there was no money around, but because this was the custom. And his father, with that Saban ancestry, laid down that Eric should join him and become an apprentice. And Eric did his apprenticeship on Edward VII, scrubbing decks, tying knots. I want to repeat it. Scrubbing decks, tying knots. And of course, sometimes he would take a turn to steer the vessel, as was the case in 1934 when Frank became ill and Eric took the wheel. While as an apprentice, he served with no pay for 2 years. You imagine that? And then $1 per month, $1 per month after that. I say all of that to underscore the point that Captain Eric Hassell began his early teenage years at a point of struggle. Nothing was gifted to him. Perhaps the only thing was gifted to him was the knowledge of seafaring and that experience from his father. He became captain in 1936 at the tender age of 22. Could you imagine that? 22, he became captain, and he got married to Doris in 1936 as well. And that marriage has produced 8 children. By the 1960s, Captain Eric Hassell had moved from being a schooner captain to that of a motorboat captain, skippering a ship called the Zipper. This Captain Eric Hassell, Peace, as he was called. And here's a very peaceful man. He's sitting on a deck of a schooner, just enjoying the sea breeze, enjoying life, and in deep thought as well. A great thinker. But in 1963, March 1963, tragedy would strike. The Zipper, as I said earlier, had over 1,500 bags of rice waiting for hungry Barbadians. And that Zipper experienced problems and went down. The story is told that as captain, of course, you're the last to leave the ship. And I should tell you that Captain Hassell could not swim. So he's seaman, but he cannot swim. And he was the last person to leave that boat. The others about 15 others got into the lifeboat. He was the last. And that was an ordeal for him. It was an ordeal because when he got back, when the Henderson, the son Henderson, a boat passing nearby, picked them up. They took them back to British Guyana. And of course, they were questioned. They were embarrassed. Captain Hassell protested. But of course, he came back to Barbados. And he had said that should a vessel under his command be lost, he would never go back to sea. And he kept his word. Although, when you read the letters between Captain Hassell and his son Frank, there's one letter that suggested that he was thinking about going back to captain the Carib Clipper. But he never returned. That incident in 1963 would have affected him, of course. But you would think that he would give up at 54 years old and say, well, I have had a long and distinguished career as a sea captain, let me retire. This was retiring now, putting on new tires for a new job, a new vacation, a new role. And that role started with the shipping of limestone. He got limestone orders from Guyana because he knew Guyanese businessmen. He knew Guyanese ship owners. And he got the orders, contacted the people at Ellesmere and Rogers Quarry, and got the orders. And that is how he started Eric Hassell and Son. I want to emphasize, however, that it was still struggle in those early days in the 1960s because you have 8 children. And that was the period when men and women, couples, had a lot of children. My mother and father had 7. And I'm sure that some of you here, your parents had 8 and 9 and sometimes 10. Nowadays it is 1 and 2. And that is causing some problems. So there was a period of struggle in the 1960s. 8 children to feed, some of them at the university. And that is when Doris, his wife, came in and played a leading role in making sure that food was on the table. She opened her home, or the family home, I should say, at Blue Waters and took visitors. In other words, you look around in periods of distress, you look around, see what you have, see what resources you have, and then you think about how am I going to use those resources to get ahead? And we have to do more of that. Look around and see what we have. Sometimes we cry and we bellyache, to use a Bayesian term. But we don't look around and see what we have. See what is going for us, what skills we have to make it in a very difficult circumstance. And Doris played an important role in partially converting the house into a guest house, making sure that things were kept on an even keel. And that was significant because you want to run a business, but you have people to feed at home. And you need that support from your wife to go forward. And that is important for businessmen. My view is that a lot of businesses fail because of a lack of cohesion in the family. If you don't have that cohesion, and the family is split, and you're apart, and you're not seeing eye to eye, sometimes you don't have that wise counsel, you don't have that support from the family, and things may go wrong. When you look at the successful businesses and read the story closely, look at J.N. Goddard and Son, started in 1920. Stable family unit where his sons came back and worked in the family. That was important. When you look at Emerson R. Alcott, the same point could be made as well. When you look at Andrew Bino's business, the same point could be made. So Captain Eric Hassell moved into Stevie Doran, and I'm pleased to see the business is still in Stevie Doran. Freight solicitation, you're soliciting freight, and a lot of that freight going out of Barbados came from Roberts Manufacturing, still going strong, Wabisco. It also came from vessel representation, representing vessels that come into the area. Of course, later on, after 1997, when you read the text, and I hope that you read it when you later on tonight when you buy one, you will see that there's a whole line of vessels, research vessels coming to the region, coming to Barbados. They're doing research, and Hassell and Son are looking after these research vessels. And that is significant. So you're adding to the portfolio all the time. And Hassell did this, Captain Hassell did this, in light of competition from other established agencies, shipping agencies. So that in the 1960s, when he started, agencies like H.B. Niblock and Plantations Limited, the Coston Company, R.M. Jones and Marine Trading, they were all established and doing very well. So it was not easy. It was a life of struggle even in those early days. But I want to ask a question. What really led to the success? What are the crucial factors in the success of the Hassell business? I dealt with a few, but I want to underscore about 4 of them, and then I'm going to close. First of all, I want to underscore the factor of location. You see the Barnes building? You see where it is located? With a good view of the wharf, a good view of that roadstead. So Captain Hassell could see those vessels when they're coming in to the carronage or coming into the roadstead. Location was important. And he started his business right there in the Barnes building on the Charles Duncan O'Neill Bridge. Then he moved to Cockspur House. Again, location. At Cockspur House, you're on the wharf side. Later on, in 1986, he moved to Carlisle House, away down the wharf area. But that location in 1986 was not necessarily a prime one, because, as I said earlier, much of the business from the wharf was moving to the north, that is, in the Deepwater Harbor or at the port. And that is why the principals of Hassell Shipping made the decision a few years ago to go to Land's End. And I congratulate them for that, because at Land's End, you are within close to the harbor and the shallow draft. And indeed, it is a very lovely building. When you see this building, very eco-friendly building as well. And next time you are passing on the Spring Garden Highway, just take a time to slow down or pull off the road and view the very eco-friendly building. And this is important. And this speaks to development, gradual development, moving from the Barnes building to a very good location here at Land's End. So I believe that when we look at the success of the company, location is critical. Secondly, diversification. Hassell started with limestone orders. Then he started to represent schooners in the early 1970s, representing over 80% of them, representing also cargo vessels coming into the region, to Barbados, and continuing to diversify that portfolio to the large container vessels. And this is Seaboard Marine. And that contract was made to represent Seaboard Marine in 2002. And Erica Luke, who is now the managing director, played a leading role in securing that contract while she was working in the business. So we're talking about diversification. And that diversification continues in the expansion of not just Eric Hassell and Son, but Eric Hassell Shipping with other agencies in the group. So we now have a full group, Eric Hassell Shipping. And that is important. As a company, you need to be agile and nimble and not stay in one area, but look for areas to diversify and move with the tide. And thirdly, succession. As you know, many Barbadian businesses started well, did well, but when the founder died, the business died with him. I can speak of James A. Tudor, James A. Martineau, who had a thriving sweet drink operation. The building is still there. We used to call them Martineau drinks. Not Martineau, Martineau drinks. Good businesses, but these businesses died with the founder. Captain Hassell brought the enterprise from infancy to maturity. And Jeffrey, one of his sons, left his job at Carib Air to join Captain Hassell, and that was important. Very important model to have your children working alongside you. So, in having Jeffrey in the business, and he's the son, Captain Hassell and son, having Jeffrey in the business, the founder was passing on the knowledge to his successor. Jeffrey left the business in 1995, and Frank left his job at McBride and led the business right up to 2007. Erica, Captain Hassell's granddaughter, started her early adult years, or I should say teenage years, spending her holidays, and Tessa as well, in the business. And that was their induction. And Erica served in a marketing capacity before she took over in 2007 and continues to lead the business to the present. Succession was critical in this regard. Many businesses fail because of not planning the succession or allowing the succession plan to come too late. But in this model, in this business, we have succession. And my prayer would be that we would continue, that the business would continue to discuss the issue of succession, because businesses, in my view, or businessmen, should not plan for their businesses to end when they're finished or when they have passed on, but to plan for their businesses to continue for many, many, many years. And that is my hope for Eric Hassell and Son and the shipping agency to continue for many years. And fourthly, in looking at the business, I find that there is a culture of organization and integrity, starting with Captain Hassell. Culture of organization and integrity. Captain Hassell was very organized. It is said that he would come in early, 5 or 6 o'clock, and look at the ledgers, and if he sees a mistake, he would point it out. Not to embarrass anybody, but just to make the correction. He had a competent and hard-working staff. I single out Jeanette Lewis, is she here? Who worked with the company for 42 years. 42 long years. And you need that type of staff continuity in a company. Captain Hassell realized the importance of incorporating his business. He appointed directors, held AGMs, had the services of Brian Griffith, and Dr. Richard Cheltenham, now Sir Richard, on board as the legal expert. And there's something that was peculiar to him. He paid his bills on time. Paid his bills on time. When people were saying to him, yes, you can applaud, that's important. He didn't wait 90 days or 60 days, paid on time. And that gave him reputation. And reputation is so important for business. And it's something that business or young entrepreneurs could pull out and gather from that Hassell experience. Pay on time, and you will get that reputation. So that if something goes wrong, and people know that you're constantly paying on time, they can say, well, you're really in trouble this time. So those are the 4 reasons, for me, the 4 factors that have contributed significantly to the success of the Hassell company. I now want to conclude by making 3 quick points. First of all, we have noted the existence of the screw dock, or the Blackwood screw dock, opened in 1893, is over 100 years old. But that screw dock, in my view, is an important symbol of our maritime heritage. When we look at the heritage, the maritime heritage of Barbados, that is one thing that stands out. Keith Mackey, a consultant engineer, coastal engineer, says that it is the oldest surviving shiplift in the world. Oldest surviving shiplift in the world. And I stress oldest. In my view, that is a selling point for heritage tourism. But I'm not sure that we as a nation or we as a people understand that. There are a lot of people who go there every Friday and Saturday night. Enjoy the fete, but don't enjoy the heritage. I believe that, like Mr. Mackey, that the dock can be restored. Mr. Mackey is suggesting $4 million or so to restore the dock. I believe it should be restored to become part of our national heritage, our tourism product. And you need it to be a part of tourism product because sometimes there are only a certain number of places you could visit in Barbados. And we have tourists who come here for many years, 30 years. They want to see something new. I congratulate Dr. Watson and other people who worked to restore the windmill at Morgan Lewis and kept it in working order. I think this could be restored to working order, or at least, if not to working order, to some semblance of pristine beauty, to make it beautiful, to repair the screws that are dropping into the sea, dropping into the water. And I think, though, it could be a very important part of the heritage of Barbados. So let's repair the screw dock. Secondly, our beaches are critical to our tourism heritage and our tourism infrastructure. Infrastructure is not just hotels, it is beaches. I think we have missed the boat with the sargassum seaweed. In my view, the seaweed needs cleaning up as soon as it lands. I have seen Bath Beach, lovely beach. I like to walk at Bath. But you really can't walk at Bath now. Seaweed has come in, blocked that passageway, but it's done something else to the beach. It's rotted, decomposed, and the color is now a darkish tinge. All because we've left it there and we have not taken it up immediately. There's a couple that go out to Brandon's every morning when we're sleeping, 4 and 5 o'clock, and they clean up the beach at Brandon's. I believe that the sargassum issue needs a national volunteer effort. Not paid effort. We want too much pay for everything. NGOs, restaurants, hotels, churches come together and say, let us adopt a beach. You know how you adopt a stop and adopt a part of the highway? Let us adopt a beach. When the sargassum come in, we clean it up and we get it off. I was at Brandon's yesterday and a little sargassum came in, not a lot, but nobody cleaned it up. It is still there. I think we have to make an effort as Barbadians to protect our heritage, protect our infrastructure. I was at Bath the other day and seaweed coming in, tourists going down there too, you know, wanting to bathe. But you are repelled by the height of the seaweed which is piling up. We have to do better at that. Thirdly, we must find ways for business stories. The story of Eric Hassell, the story of J.N. Goddard, and other business stories, to get into our school system, especially in our primary, and I stress primary, and secondary schools. You know, there's some lovely little books that you can read about great innovators and the Rockefellers and all those people, J.P. Morgan. Little books written to specified age groups. I am suggesting that we embark on a project to get these stories, the Hassell story, a story of tragedy and triumph, into the minds of Barbadians. And there's a reason for it. It is important that we think entrepreneurial. That people who are sent home, people who are retrenched, begin to think of themselves as businessmen and women. And we just can't think about that when the time has come for retrenchment, but we have to think about that as a little teenager in a third form, or a little 11-year-old at fourth form in primary school. It is when these business stories enter our people, then it inspires them to become entrepreneurs. We teach accounts, public management of business, all these subjects in the fourth and fifth form, but no business stories. So we're teaching people to run somebody else's business, not to make theirs and develop theirs. It is a must for us to find ways of getting these business stories in the schools. May I suggest that one way to do that is to introduce history again in the secondary schools from first to third form. This will give students the knowledge and the confidence to aspire to entrepreneurship rather than aspiring to work in another firm. And by aspiring to be an entrepreneur, you're really looking to employ other people as well. And that, in my view, is one of the keys to our economic growth going forward in 2020 and beyond. And you can start this process of education today, tonight, by purchasing a book for a family or a friend. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carter. You all much better offer for that very informative session. I would like to now thank Ms. Stephanie Bavell to do the vote of thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, my task is perhaps the easiest. On behalf of the Board of Directors, management and staff of Eric Hassell Group of Companies, I wish to thank Minister Kirk Humphrey for his kind remarks, to Tessa Chatterton-Shaw for her tireless efforts in organizing this lecture, to Sherilyn Harding for her continued loyalty and commitment to the company by assisting in every way possible, and all members of the planning committee, we say thank you. Finally, but by no means least, Dr. Carter, it has been an honor to work with you. Your contribution has been invaluable. We appreciate your continued efforts in unearthing our history. Thank you, sir. To all our invited guests, our customers, friends, and extended Hassell family, thank you for your support, for taking the time to attend the lecture. We hope that you have found it informative and educational. At this time, I'll ask Damani to come forward, as we like to make a special salute to one of the leading ladies of the Hassell family, Mrs. Shirley Chatterton. Today is her birthday. And for those of you who don't know, this is Erica's dear mom and Tessa's. And we'd say, happy birthday to you, Mrs. Chatterton. God bless you and wish you many more. You're welcome. Damani, turn around, turn around. You're welcome. Yes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there's some light refreshments being served outside in the foyer, and there are drinks as well. Our book is also on sale, and if you so desire to purchase a copy, Dr. Carter will be kind assist to giving an autograph for you. Thank you all. Oh, and before you go, on CBC TV 8 on Sunday, every Sunday for this month, there's a feature being aired on the Hassell journey and the history of the maritime industry at 7:30 on Sunday evening, CBC TV 8. Thank you.
Voy para Martané, llego a Puerto